There are moments in every relationship when we find ourselves asking a difficult question. Is this still alive? Or has it quietly ended while I kept holding on? The truth is, relationships don't usually end with a sudden explosion. They often fade in whispers, small breaks and silent fractures that accumulate over time. Today, I want to share with you some of the clearest signs that your relationship may be over. Not to create fear, but to offer clarity, courage, and honesty. The first sign is when the absence of trust becomes louder than words. Every strong relationship is built on trust, like the ground beneath your feet. But when trust is broken, through lies, betrayal, or repeated disappointments, you can feel it. You begin to question everything: their words, their actions, their promises. You no longer feel safe placing your heart in their hands. And when you spend more time trying to verify than simply believing, you are no longer in a relationship. You are in an investigation. The second sign appears when vulnerability feels unsafe instead of sacred. The beauty of love is that we can show up as our truest, messiest, most imperfect selves and still be accepted. But if you no longer feel safe to cry in front of them, to share your struggles, or to speak your truth without being judged, mocked, or dismissed, then the heart of the relationship has already begun to close. When vulnerability is no longer honored, intimacy disappears, and what remains is only performance. The third sign is when disconnection replaces intimacy and silence replaces conversation. Every relationship has seasons of distance, but when silence becomes the default, when nights are spent scrolling on phones instead of reaching for each other, when conversations are about logistics instead of dreams, that's when you know the threads of connection are unraveling. Disconnection is not about arguments, it's about indifference. Because the opposite of love is not hate, it's apathy. The fourth sign is when resentment becomes stronger than forgiveness. Every relationship requires repair. Apologies, grace, second chances. But when apologies no longer heal, when wounds are reopened instead of closed, when every argument ends with old hurts being thrown like weapons, it is a sign that love has been replaced by bitterness. Resentment is like rust. It spreads quietly, and before long, it eats through even the strongest bonds. And the final sign is when staying costs more of your soul than leaving. Love should never destroy the essence of who you are. If you find yourself dimming your light to keep someone else comfortable, if you are shrinking daily to fit inside the limits of their love, if your peace and joy have become hostages to their presence, then it is time to ask yourself, is this relationship giving life, or is it taking it away? Recognizing these signs doesn't mean you failed. It means you are being honest with yourself. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not to keep holding on, but to let go. Love is not proven by how tightly you cling, but by how courageously you honor truth, your truth. A relationship that is over does not mean your story is over. It simply means this chapter is complete and the next one is waiting for you. Trust is the foundation of every relationship, and without it, even the most beautiful bond begins to crumble. When trust disappears, the silence it leaves behind speaks louder than any words ever could. It is not always a dramatic betrayal that causes this absence. Sometimes it is the slow erosion of reliability, consistency, and truthfulness. Trust is not built in a single act but through small, repeated moments of honesty, presence, and care. And when those moments begin to vanish, when your partner's words no longer align with their actions, when promises are broken more often than they are kept, you start to feel the ground beneath you shift. It becomes harder to lean on them, harder to believe, harder to let yourself rest in the security of love. Instead of feeling like a home, the relationship begins to feel like a storm. The absence of trust shows itself in subtle ways first. You find yourself checking their phone when they leave the room. Not because you want to invade their privacy, but because your heart no longer believes in the surface of their words. You ask questions with suspicion instead of curiosity, waiting for inconsistencies in their answers. You replay conversations in your mind, searching for signs of lies. What once felt natural, open, and freeing now feels heavy, tense, and filled with doubt. And though you may still be physically together, emotionally you are worlds apart. Trust is what allows two people to meet in the middle without fear. But without it, every step forward feels dangerous, every expression feels vulnerable, and every word feels uncertain. The painful truth is that once trust is damaged, everything else begins to unravel. Intimacy, which depends on safety, becomes shallow or disappears entirely. Communication turns into guarded exchanges instead of open sharing. Love itself begins to feel conditional, fragile, and easily broken. You may still say, "I love you," out of habit, but beneath those words there is a quiet ache that whispers, "Can I really? Can I still trust you with my heart?" And when that question lingers long enough, it becomes louder than the love you're trying to hold on to. The absence of trust also changes who you are in the relationship. You begin to guard your heart, not just from your partner, but from yourself. You stop expressing your full truth because you're afraid it will be twisted or used against you. You stop dreaming together because you're not sure they'll be there when the dream needs building. You stop sharing your deepest fears because you doubt they will hold them with tenderness. Instead of growing into your fullest self, you shrink into a version that feels safe enough to survive the uncertainty. And little by little, the vibrant energy of love is replaced with the exhausting effort of self-protection. What makes the absence of trust so devastating is that it cannot be covered by words alone. Promises lose meaning when they are not backed by consistent action. Apologies fall flat when they are repeated without change. Love declarations feel hollow when they do not align with daily behavior. Words can be powerful in healing trust, but when words are disconnected from action, they only make the wound deeper. You begin to crave proof, not poetry. You want consistency, not charm. You need reality, not performance. And if those needs are not met, you start to realize that you are not in love with who they are now. You are clinging to who you believed them to be before the trust was broken. In many relationships, people stay long after trust has left the room. They hold on because of history, fear of loneliness, financial ties, or the hope that things will change. But in that holding on, they lose themselves. They learn to tolerate dishonesty, to normalize secrecy, to live with suspicion. And the sad part is that this tolerance is not strength, it is a form of slow self-abandonment. When you convince yourself that you can live without trust, you are really convincing yourself to accept a relationship without depth, without security, without true love. Because love without trust is not love. It is attachment, it is dependency. It is a shadow of what real connection should be. Rebuilding trust is possible, but it requires both partners to be brutally honest, patient, and consistent. It requires the one who broke trust to not only admit their failure, but to take full responsibility for change without defensiveness. It requires the one who was hurt to choose forgiveness, not as blind acceptance, but as a conscious decision to open themselves again, knowing the risk. But even with effort, rebuilding is not always possible, because trust is not simply about actions. It is about belief. And when your heart no longer believes, when doubt has rooted itself so deeply that no words or actions can erase it, then it becomes a sign that the relationship is no longer alive. One of the clearest indicators that your relationship may be over is when you find yourself no longer able to rest in trust. You may still go through the motions, eat meals together, sleep in the same bed, celebrate anniversaries, but deep down, you know something essential is gone. You know you cannot relax in their presence the way you once did. You know your guard never comes down. You know that peace has left, and all that remains is a performance of togetherness. And that quiet knowing is often more powerful than any words they can say. The absence of trust is not only about what your partner has done, it is also about what it does to you. It steals your peace, erodes your confidence, and clouds your joy. It leaves you second, guessing yourself, doubting your intuition, and questioning your worth. And sometimes, the bravest choice you can make is to stop silencing that inner voice that tells you the truth. This relationship is no longer safe for your heart. Choosing to leave does not mean you failed. It means you chose to honor your soul above your fear. At the end of the day, trust is not optional in love. It is essential. Without it, there may still be moments of affection, attraction, or even laughter, but there will never again be the deep safety that allows love to thrive. When the absence of trust becomes louder than words, it is often the universe giving you clarity. It is telling you that the bond has already broken, and that holding on will only wound you further. The silence of missing trust is not empty. It is full of truth, and that truth, as painful as it is, can set you free. One of the most beautiful parts of a relationship is the freedom to be vulnerable. To take off the mask you wear in the outside world and allow another person to see you exactly as you are. Vulnerability is the heartbeat of intimacy. It is what allows two people to move beyond surface level interaction into the deep waters of connection where love feels alive and safe. But when vulnerability shifts from being sacred to being unsafe, that relationship begins to change in ways that are difficult to repair. Vulnerability should be a gift exchanged, not a weapon used. When you can no longer share your fears, your doubts, your tears, or your unpolished truth without the fear of judgment, ridicule, or betrayal, you know that the ground beneath your relationship has become unsteady. In the beginning, many relationships feel like safe places for openness. You share your stories, your childhood memories, your scars, your insecurities, and they are met with tenderness. You feel seen and heard, and in that space, love blooms. But over time, if those moments of raw honesty are no longer met with compassion, something begins to close inside of you. You start holding back. You start editing your words. You avoid bringing up what hurts because you've learned it will be dismissed or minimized. You avoid revealing your deeper feelings because you've been made to feel too sensitive or too much. Instead of intimacy, there is distance. Instead of closeness, there is a quiet fear that being real will cost you more than being silent. The danger of losing safety in vulnerability is that it forces you to live in fragments. You show only the parts of yourself that feel acceptable, while the deeper parts remain hidden. You may still laugh, share stories, and even enjoy physical intimacy, but beneath all of that is an invisible wall. Love cannot truly thrive where walls exist, because the essence of love is freedom, the freedom to be imperfect, to be weak sometimes, to cry without shame, to fail without fear, to speak without walking on eggshells. When that freedom is gone, you may still call it a relationship, but in truth, it becomes a performance where neither person gets to meet the other in their full humanity. When vulnerability feels unsafe, silence becomes your survival mechanism. You stop mentioning how lonely you feel, how hurt you are by their words, how much you miss their presence, even when they are sitting right beside you. You may try once or twice, but after being dismissed, mocked, or met with indifference, you decide that silence is easier. But silence is not neutral. Silence is the slow death of connection. Every unspoken truth builds a distance between you. Every withheld emotion becomes a brick in the wall, and eventually, the relationship suffocates under the weight of what is unsaid. It is also true that when vulnerability becomes unsafe, fear begins to replace love. Instead of reaching for your partner, you pull back. Instead of turning to them in your struggles, you go elsewhere, to friends, to family, or worse, into isolation. Instead of sharing your authentic self, you curate a version of you that feels less risky. Fear begins to dictate your choices. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of being abandoned if you show too much. But love cannot grow in the soil of fear. It shrinks, it withers, and it eventually disappears. The pain of this shift is not only in what you cannot say, but in what it does to your sense of worth. When you feel unsafe to be vulnerable, you begin to question whether you are too much or not enough. You internalize the lack of care as a reflection of your value. You start believing that your emotions are a burden, that your needs are unreasonable, that your heart is asking for something it does not deserve. And slowly, you stop honoring yourself in order to keep the peace. But the tragedy is that peace built on the silencing of vulnerability is not peace at all. It is suppression, and suppression always leaves scars. In a healthy relationship, vulnerability is sacred because it is honored. When one partner opens up, the other receives with empathy. When one cries, the other listens. When one shares a fear, the other holds it gently instead of dismissing it. Sacredness means that what is shared is kept safe, not thrown back in arguments or used as ammunition. Sacredness means that weakness is not mocked, but embraced as part of being human. Sacredness means that in the fragile moments, love shows up not with solutions but with presence. Without this sacredness, what you have is not intimacy but exposure, and exposure without safety breeds shame. When vulnerability becomes unsafe, the relationship begins to feel lonely, even when you are not alone. You could be sitting across from each other at the dinner table, but the distance between your hearts feels wider than oceans. You could be lying beside each other at night, but your thoughts remain locked inside, unspoken, unshared. Loneliness in a relationship is often not about physical absence, but about emotional absence. And emotional absence always begins where vulnerability ends. It is important to recognize that this shift does not always happen dramatically. Sometimes it is the accumulation of small moments, a sarcastic comment when you shared something serious, a distracted response when you poured out your heart, an eye roll when you revealed a dream, a sigh when you expressed your need. These moments teach you over time that it is safer to keep things inside than to risk being open. And by the time you realize what has happened, you are already living with your heart half hidden. No longer giving the relationship the chance to grow because it no longer feels like a place where growth is possible. The absence of safe vulnerability is one of the clearest signs that a relationship may be over, because it indicates that the foundation of trust and intimacy has been compromised. You can survive without constant excitement, without perfect harmony, even without endless passion. But you cannot survive without the ability to be real. The cost is too high. Without vulnerability, there is no depth, and without depth, there is no true love, only an imitation of it. When vulnerability is no longer sacred, the relationship stops being a partnership and starts being a performance. And performances, no matter how convincing, cannot sustain the soul. If you are living in a relationship where you cannot be vulnerable, you are living in half-truths. And half-truths are not enough to carry the weight of love. To love fully is to be known fully, and if you cannot be known, then you are not truly loved. You are only tolerated. The hardest decision often comes when you recognize that you cannot continue living in a space where vulnerability is unsafe. Because choosing to leave is not just about leaving a person. It is about reclaiming your right to be whole. It is about deciding that your truth deserves a safe home. And if this relationship cannot be that home, then it is not the place for you to stay. It takes courage to honor that realization, but courage is what love requires. Ultimately, love is not about never hurting each other. It is about creating a space where even in hurt, vulnerability is still welcomed. If that space no longer exists, if your heart no longer feels safe, then the relationship has already shifted from love into something else. And sometimes the most loving act you can do for yourself is to accept that truth and walk toward the possibility of finding a love where vulnerability is not only safe, but sacred again. One of the clearest signs that a relationship is slowly dying is when disconnection begins to take the place of intimacy and silence begins to take the place of conversation. Intimacy is not only about physical closeness, it is about the invisible thread of understanding, laughter, affection, an emotional presence that ties two people together. It is about the spark of wanting to reach across the table, the joy of knowing that someone truly sees you, and the peace of knowing that even in the middle of chaos, you are not alone. But when disconnection starts to creep in, those moments that once felt natural become rare, forced, or even non-existent. The bond that once held two hearts together begins to weaken, and without consistent nurturing, it eventually breaks. Disconnection often begins quietly. At first, you may just notice longer pauses in conversations, more evenings spent in separate rooms, or more time scrolling on your phones instead of sharing stories. The "how was your day?" that once opened the door to meaningful conversations turns into a casual question answered with one word. The laughter that once filled the room is replaced by silence and the small rituals of connection. A goodnight kiss, a hand on the back, a warm embrace start to fade. You may still live under the same roof, but emotionally you are no longer living together. Instead, you are living parallel lives that occasionally intersect, but rarely intertwine. This shift from intimacy to disconnection can be one of the most painful experiences in a relationship because it does not always come with an argument or a dramatic rupture. Instead, it comes with absence. You begin to feel like strangers sitting side by side. You share meals, responsibilities, and maybe even a bed, but the closeness you once felt is gone. What is even harder is that sometimes you cannot point to one single cause. It is not that one moment broke everything. It is that 1,000 small moments were neglected, unspoken, or ignored. Connection is maintained through presence, and when presence is withdrawn, even slowly, the heart begins to notice. Silence in a relationship is not always peaceful. There is a silence that feels sacred, where two people can sit together without words and still feel deeply connected. That kind of silence is comforting because it rests on the foundation of intimacy. But there is another silence, one that feels heavy and suffocating, because it is filled with all the things left unsaid. This kind of silence is not peace but distance. It is the silence that grows when one or both partners stop trying, stop sharing, stop reaching out. It is the silence that builds walls instead of bridges. And when silence takes the place of conversation, the relationship begins to lose its soul. Conversation is not only about exchanging information, it is about exchanging hearts. It is how two people stay updated on each other's inner worlds, how they learn what the other is feeling, what they are dreaming, what they are struggling with. When those conversations end, so does the possibility of truly knowing each other. Over time, you may realize that you no longer know what your partner is passionate about, what they are worried about, or what makes them happy. They may no longer know those things about you either. Without conversation, intimacy cannot survive because intimacy requires awareness, and awareness requires words. Disconnection also has a way of changing the atmosphere of a relationship. The warmth that once filled the space is replaced with coldness. The home that once felt like a sanctuary begins to feel like just a shared space. You may even find yourself avoiding your partner, staying out longer, or filling your schedule with distractions just to avoid the uncomfortable silence that lingers when you are together. In that avoidance, the distance grows even wider, and while you may still tell yourself that everything is fine because there are no fights or dramatic arguments, the truth is that the absence of conflict does not mean the presence of love. Sometimes the quietest relationships are the ones that are already broken because silence has taken the place of effort. One of the most dangerous aspects of disconnection is that it often leads to loneliness within the relationship. There are few things more painful than lying next to someone and feeling alone, sitting across from them and feeling unseen, or living with them and feeling unknown. Loneliness inside of a relationship can be more devastating than loneliness outside of one, because it comes with the haunting memory of what you once had. You remember how it used to feel to be close, to share secrets, to dream together, and the contrast between then and now makes the disconnection even heavier. It becomes a grief for something that is still physically present, but emotionally gone. Disconnection does not always happen because of intentional neglect or malice. Sometimes it happens because life gets busy, responsibilities pile up, or both partners become consumed by work, children, or personal struggles. But whatever the reason, the result is the same. When connection is no longer prioritized, intimacy fades. A relationship cannot survive on autopilot. It requires intentional acts of reaching out, listening, touching, and sharing. Without these, love does not grow, it withers. It is also true that disconnection, if left unaddressed, eventually changes the way you see your partner. Where once you saw a lover, a best friend, and a safe place, you begin to see only a roommate, a co-parent, or a stranger. Where once their presence brought comfort, it now brings indifference. And indifference is often more dangerous than anger. Anger at least means you still care enough to feel. Indifference means you have stopped caring altogether. When you no longer feel joy in their presence, when you no longer reach for them instinctively, when you no longer feel loss in their absence, that is when you know disconnection has replaced intimacy. Some people try to fill this void with distractions, focusing more on work, hobbies, or friends. Others may seek connection outside the relationship, not always through physical affairs but through emotional ones, where they find in someone else the listening ear and understanding heart they no longer find at home. These responses are symptoms of a deeper truth. The relationship itself has become unable to provide the intimacy it once did. The hard reality is that when disconnection and silence dominate, it is often a sign that the relationship is nearing its end. Relationships do not die only when people stop loving each other. Sometimes they die when people stop trying to stay connected. Love is not just a feeling. It is a practice, a choice, a daily commitment to stay engaged. Without that, even the strongest bond can unravel. If you find yourself in a relationship where disconnection has replaced intimacy and silence has replaced conversation, you are faced with a difficult decision. Do you continue to live in this emptiness, hoping that somehow things will change? Or do you face the painful truth that what once was may no longer be? Recognizing the silence for what it is, a symptom of deeper disconnection, can be the first step toward clarity. Sometimes that clarity leads to repair if both partners are willing to fight for reconnection. But if that willingness is absent, then the silence is not just temporary, it is final. At its core, love is about being known and being seen. When that no longer happens, when you are no longer sharing your inner world and no longer receiving theirs, the relationship ceases to be a relationship in the true sense of the word. It becomes two people coexisting, not two people loving. And while coexistence may keep you together physically, it will never satisfy the soul that longs for intimacy, presence, and connection. The silence will continue to grow, and in that silence, the truth becomes clear: the relationship, as it once was, is already over. One of the most destructive forces in any relationship is resentment. At first, it may start small, just a lingering irritation or a memory of something hurtful left unresolved. But if it is not acknowledged and healed, resentment grows, and over time, it becomes stronger than forgiveness. A relationship can survive mistakes, disagreements, and even deep pain if both people are willing to repair and forgive. But once resentment takes root and begins to dominate, it poisons the connection, and the bond slowly erodes until there is little left to hold on to. Forgiveness is the act of releasing pain in order to restore peace. But resentment is the act of holding pain tightly, carrying it forward, and letting it shape the way you see your partner. And when resentment becomes the default, love begins to fade. Resentment is different from anger. Anger can be expressed, processed, and moved through. Resentment, on the other hand, is anger that has gone silent, anger that has hardened into bitterness. It lives in the background of every interaction, coloring conversations, shaping responses, and altering the way you view even the smallest actions of your partner. When resentment is present, everything they do can feel like a reminder of what went wrong. A late reply to a message is no longer just a late reply. It becomes proof that they don't care. A forgotten errand is no longer just forgetfulness. It becomes evidence of neglect. A raised voice is no longer just frustration. It becomes confirmation of disrespect. Resentment interprets everything through the lens of old wounds, and so the relationship can never return to a place of innocence or ease. The tragedy of resentment is that it often builds in silence. Many people do not speak about what is hurting them in the moment because they want to avoid conflict. They swallow their feelings, telling themselves it is not worth bringing up or that they will get over it. But the truth is, they do not get over it. They store it. And every time they store it, the weight grows heavier. Over months or years, the collection of unspoken hurts turns into resentment. And by the time it is finally expressed, it comes out not as a gentle sharing of pain, but as an explosion of bitterness. This delayed expression makes reconciliation even harder, because the partner who is hearing it feels blindsided, while the one who has carried it feels exhausted from years of silent suffering. Forgiveness, in contrast, is not about forgetting or excusing, but about choosing not to let past pain dictate the present. It is a decision to give the relationship another chance, to start fresh even after being wounded. Forgiveness requires humility, compassion, and a genuine willingness to see the humanity of the other person. But when resentment has already built up, forgiveness becomes difficult. Instead of seeing your partner's humanity, you see only their failures. Instead of remembering their efforts, you remember only their mistakes. Forgiveness becomes an uphill battle because resentment has already convinced you that the relationship is not safe, that your needs will never be met, and that history will only repeat itself. When resentment becomes stronger than forgiveness, the relationship begins to live in the past instead of the present. Every disagreement reopens old wounds. Every conversation circles back to the same unresolved issues, and every attempt to move forward gets pulled back by the weight of what has not been healed. Instead of solving one problem at a time, you find yourself carrying all the problems at once, stacking them like bricks in a wall that separates you from each other. Love cannot thrive when the past has more power than the present, because true love requires the willingness to release and renew. The impact of resentment is also felt in the way it changes intimacy. When you carry bitterness toward your partner, it is difficult to be vulnerable with them, to soften in their presence, or to experience genuine closeness. The touch that once felt comforting may now feel distant. The words that once carried warmth may now sound empty. Resentment blocks affection because affection requires openness, and openness cannot exist where the heart has closed itself in defense. Over time, this lack of intimacy deepens the resentment because the absence of closeness reinforces the feeling of being unloved. It becomes a cycle that feeds itself, making repair harder with each passing day. Another way resentment reveals itself is through passive aggression. Instead of directly expressing what you feel, resentment makes you withdraw, withhold affection, or express your pain indirectly. You may stop doing small acts of kindness for your partner, stop initiating conversations, or stop making efforts to connect. You may criticize more, sigh heavily, or make sarcastic comments instead of speaking honestly about what is hurting you. These behaviors further damage the relationship because they create more misunderstandings and more distance, while the real issues remain buried. In this way, resentment not only poisons the relationship, it prevents the healing that forgiveness could bring. What makes resentment particularly destructive is that it is cumulative. A single mistake can be forgiven, but when small hurts are piled on top of one another without resolution, they begin to feel insurmountable. You no longer see your partner as someone who occasionally makes mistakes. You see them as someone who always disappoints you, someone who cannot be trusted to meet your needs, someone who does not care. The image of them becomes distorted, and once that distorted image takes hold, it is nearly impossible to see them clearly again. When resentment becomes stronger than forgiveness, the future of the relationship is in danger because forgiveness is what allows for renewal. Every relationship requires renewal, the chance to start over after conflict, the chance to choose each other again after pain. Without forgiveness, there is no renewal, only repetition of the same wounds. Eventually, you stop believing things can get better. You stop hoping for change. You stop trying. And that is when the relationship truly ends. Not when the first mistake was made, but when the possibility of forgiveness was lost. To recognize that resentment has taken over is to recognize that the relationship may no longer be sustainable, because love cannot coexist with bitterness for long. Love requires a soft heart, an open hand, and a willingness to let go of past pain. Resentment hardens the heart, closes the hand, and holds on tightly to every wound. The longer it is allowed to stay, the more it consumes the love that once felt so alive. And if both partners are not equally committed to dismantling that resentment through honest conversation, accountability, and repeated acts of care, then the relationship has little chance of survival. Sometimes people believe that staying in a relationship despite resentment is a sign of strength or loyalty. But staying without forgiveness is not loyalty. It is imprisonment. It keeps both partners locked in a cycle of hurt that never heals, preventing either of them from experiencing true love. The real strength is in either choosing forgiveness wholeheartedly or choosing to walk away honestly. Anything else is a half-life where the relationship exists in name but not in truth. In the end, resentment becoming stronger than forgiveness is one of the clearest signs that a relationship is over. Because without forgiveness, there is no path back to connection. Without forgiveness, there is no space for growth. Without forgiveness, the love that once felt expansive becomes narrow, constrained by the weight of past wounds. And as much as we may want to hold on, there comes a point where holding on to resentment means letting go of love. Recognizing this truth is painful, but it is also freeing. It gives you permission to choose a different path, whether that path is to rebuild trust and forgiveness, if both partners are willing, or to release the relationship entirely if they are not. Either way, the lesson is clear. Love cannot survive when resentment is stronger than forgiveness. And when you realize that forgiveness is no longer possible, it may be the sign you need to accept that the relationship, as you once knew it, has already come to an end. There comes a moment in some relationships when you realize that staying is no longer an act of love, but an act of self-betrayal. It is a moment that often creeps up slowly. After years of trying, years of hoping, years of giving more than you receive. At first, you convince yourself that things will get better, that if you are patient enough, forgiving enough, strong enough, the relationship will return to what it once was. You hold on tightly, believing that leaving would mean failure, that leaving would mean you didn't try hard enough. But as time passes, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. The cost of staying is greater than the cost of leaving. And when that happens, The most loving choice you can make is to honor your own soul by walking away. The cost of staying often shows up in subtle ways. You notice that your laughter has become rare, your energy has diminished, your joy feels muted. You begin to feel like a shadow of yourself, carrying around an invisible weight that never seems to lift. Where once the relationship was a source of strength, it has become a source of exhaustion. Every day feels like an act of survival, not a celebration of love. And even though you may still share the same home, the same routines, and the same social life, inside you know that you are not thriving. You are merely enduring. Staying in a relationship that drains your soul can make you forget who you are. You may find yourself silencing your opinions to avoid conflict, shrinking your dreams to avoid criticism, or dimming your light to keep the peace. Over time, this becomes normal to you. You forget what it felt like to be fully alive, fully free, fully yourself. You convince yourself that this is just what relationships are like, that everyone sacrifices, that everyone compromises, that everyone feels stuck sometimes. But deep down, you know there is a difference between healthy compromise and soul-crushing sacrifice. Compromise allows you to grow together. Soul-crushing sacrifice forces you to abandon yourself. And when staying requires you to abandon yourself, the price is too high. The fear of leaving often keeps people in relationships long after they should have walked away. You fear being alone, fear starting over, fear disappointing your family or community, fear the unknown. You think of the history you share, the memories you've built, the life you've created together, and you wonder how you could ever let it all go. And yet, while you cling to the past out of fear, the present continues to slip away. You wake up each morning and realize that another day has passed where you are not fully living, where you are not fully happy, where you are not fully yourself. The years stretch on, and the cost of staying grows heavier. What once was fear of leaving becomes regret for not leaving sooner. When staying costs more than leaving, your body often knows before your mind admits it. You may feel it in the tension in your shoulders, the heaviness in your chest, the exhaustion that lingers even after sleep. You may notice that your spirit feels restless, that you crave freedom, that you fantasize about a life where you can breathe again. These are not signs of weakness. They are signals from your soul that something is deeply wrong. And the longer you ignore those signals, the more disconnected you become from yourself. Eventually, you may find that you no longer recognize the person in the mirror because the person staring back has given so much away that little remains. The heartbreaking reality is that love is not supposed to cost you your soul. Love is supposed to enrich you, expand you, inspire you to grow into more of who you are. Of course, every relationship has its challenges, its sacrifices, its compromises. But none of those should require you to lose your essence, your voice, or your peace. When love becomes a prison instead of a home, when it becomes a source of anxiety instead of comfort, when it becomes a weight instead of a gift, that is when staying has become too costly. One of the greatest lies people tell themselves is that leaving is selfish. But the truth is that staying in a relationship that is draining you is the greater act of selfishness because it robs both you and your partner of the chance to live in authenticity. If you are staying out of obligation, guilt, or fear, then you are not offering true love. You are offering a hollow version of it. And your partner, whether they realize it or not, deserves more than that. You both deserve a love that is alive, not one that is being kept alive artificially out of duty. There is also the belief that leaving means giving up. But sometimes, leaving is the bravest act of love you can give to yourself. It is an act of saying, I will not abandon myself any longer. I will not silence my needs. I will not dim my light. I will not carry a burden that is crushing me. It is an act of reclaiming your worth, of declaring that you are deserving of a love that heals rather than harms, A love that supports rather than suffocates. A love that frees rather than traps. The truth is, staying in a relationship that costs more of your soul than leaving does not just affect you. It affects everyone around you. It affects the way you show up for your children, your friends, your work, and your own future. When you are drained, you cannot give fully to anything. When you are unhappy, that unhappiness spills into every area of your life. By choosing to leave, you are not only freeing yourself, you are freeing everyone connected to you from the weight of your half-lived existence. Of course, the decision to leave is never easy. It is filled with fear, grief, uncertainty, and pain. But pain is not always a sign you are making the wrong choice. Sometimes pain is simply the price of freedom. Sometimes pain is the path to healing. And sometimes the pain of leaving is far less than the pain of staying another year, another decade, another lifetime in a relationship that is draining you of who you are meant to be. In the end, the question is not whether leaving is easy. The question is whether staying is killing the best parts of you. If the answer is yes, then the truth is already clear. You may delay it, deny it, or try to bargain with it, but eventually, your soul will demand that you honor it. And honoring your soul is never the wrong choice. When staying costs more of your soul than leaving, it is a sign that the relationship is already over. The love that once gave you life has now taken it away, and the only way forward is to release it. That release is not a failure. It is an act of courage, an act of self-respect, and ultimately, an act of hope. Because by choosing to leave what is draining you, you open the door to what can heal you. You open the door to a future where love is not a burden but a blessing.